This vegan is objecting to the accusation that vegans are emotionally manipulating people with the graphic footage or images. Let's go point by point.
And this person even asks, what's the point of showing them at all, since they aren't an argument? So let's go over 5 reasons these claims sort of fall apart upon further scrutiny. I'll mostly be focusing on the claim as it relates to presenting videos, but stay to the end because I wrap up with a more general critique and practical tips for how to apply some of these lessons in vegan outreach. Pictures and video can convey information that's either impossible or highly inefficient to convey verbally. Imagine I had some emergency come up, and I asked you to pick up my friend from the airport, and you very reasonably ask, well, what do they look like? And I said, oh, she's easy to spot. Red hair, brown eyes, nice eyebrows. And you pull up and see these 4 people waiting. Which one do you pick up? So you call me back and I say, oh, well, she doesn't have freckles. So we can eliminate her, but how are we going to distinguish between these 3? Now, maybe with enough words, I can describe the exact angle of jaws and length of noses, and you could roll up with a ruler and protractor and math it out. But even if you could, if this wasn't a multiple choice test, I'd never be able to tender an exact verbal description of what this person looked like. But imagine if instead I just quickly sent you this picture. Problem solved, instantly. This is why the phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words, rings true. In the same way, the horrors of what goes on in farms and slaughterhouses can't fully be conveyed via verbal description. And even if it could, it's conveyed much more efficiently with video.
Sure, in certain situations, a picture can really be helpful. It is helpful when there is too little information or if there is confusion, just like in the example from the video. But it is redundant when you have sufficient information or if there is no confusion. In most cases, vegans showing the footage is not done as some kind of clarification or help.
But what's really strange is how inconsistently this principle is being applied. I've never seen people raise this objection when someone highlights other famous instances of violence, exploitation, and injustice. What if I could only describe sweatshops to you, but I couldn't show you images and videos like this? I could only say things like X number of workers are crammed into a building of Y square feet for Z number of hours. Would these same people say the inclusion of imagery somehow hampers our understanding or assessment of the conditions there? Are these same people objecting when someone shows imagery of the Holocaust or Vietnam, or the Civil Rights Movement, or the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and not objecting because the images are disturbing, objecting because the images aren't an argument or somehow represent an appeal to emotion fallacy?
Appeals to emotion?
Do these images enhance or detract from your comprehensive understanding of these events? What if I said the US dropped a bomb on Hiroshima, which destroyed much of the city and killed 80,000 people? That sounds bad, of course, but it doesn't deeply connect you with the sorrow and horror these images communicate.
There is a time and place for pictures or footage. For example, just as previously stated, in order to clear some confusion. When I mentioned sweatshops in a discussion with some people, I don't all of a sudden grab my phone and search for a picture. That would be weird. Shoving the footage in people's faces in the middle of the street doesn't clear confusion. It isn't really required. Vegans do that because they think it's effective to convert people into veganism.
And that leads us to some sneaky psychological quirks lurking beneath the surface when we talk about reporting dry statistics versus showing footage of an individual or small group of animals suffering and dying. Now, the footage will be more evocative for many reasons, but among them are 2 psychological phenomena known as psychic numbing and compassion collapse, described by psychology professor Paul Slovic in this paper. So the best way to understand these phenomena is to start by describing what they're not. And what they're not is the attitudes and behavior we'd expect from a perfectly rational person. So when thinking about the lives of individuals, there might be 2 ways we'd rationally view an increasing number of deaths. In one scenario, we have a linear relationship, meaning compared with 1 death, we see 2 deaths as twice as bad, 3 deaths as 3 times as bad, etc. Another way we might rationally view an increasing number of deaths is exponentially, meaning we might start to value a large number of deaths disproportionately more because it might reach some threshold where a genocide has been committed or an entire society or population collapses. But what we wouldn't expect from a rational agent is what actually happens, which is one of these 2 things. In psychic numbing, as the number of deaths increases, the amount we care gradually levels off.
This seems to be loaded. What is meant by perfectly rational person? And why should I accept that? Well, I don't know. He never explained. I did search for the perfectly rational in the paper he mentioned, and there was no such thing. So this whole talk about rational agents and perfectly rational people are a bunch of unsupported assumptions.
Videos lend credibility that words alone don't. If you walk up to me on the street and I tell you that pigs are killed in gas chambers, you might think I'm lying, ill-informed, exaggerating, or that I'm using the word gas chamber in a loose, figurative sense. But seeing the video puts all those concerns to bed, or at the very least, lessens their potency. This is one reason video evidence is so powerful in other domains. To highlight just one salient example, imagine if in the trial of Derek Chauvin, there was no video evidence showing the moments leading up to George Floyd's death. Do we think the verdict in that case would have been different? Do we think those officers would have even been fired? We'll never know with absolute certainty, but we can confidently say the video evidence was critically important to that case, irrespective of how emotional it was.
Yes, videos can be used as evidence of something, like in trials, or if one doubts the other is telling the truth. And in most cases, when vegans shove the footage in people's faces, it isn't used as evidence.
So it seems like you're pretty empathetic, like you're kind of tuned into this. Would you mind watching a quick 60-second video on my phone?
Oh yeah, yes.
Hello. And this is like standard practice in the industry.
And pieces cut from their ears or tags punched in as a meat.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so you know the horrors that entails. Okay, well great. Then the only other thing I guess I would ask is, would you be willing to watch a brief 30 seconds of footage of what happens to pig in the industry?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, awesome.
We are 4 points in and are yet to talk about the actual topic of appealing to emotions.
Alright, so that brings us to the most debate-broy claim of all, that videos are an appeal to emotion fallacy, or that vegans are always committing this fallacy in discussions.
Doing, appeals to emotion or whatever that you see a lot in vegan communities.
But here's my assessment. The appeal to emotion fallacy is a weird fallacy, and we should probably stop accusing people of it. So I think this sums up the definition of the fallacy decently well. Basically, using emotions in place of reason to win an argument. The problem is, roughly speaking, there seems to be two major ways this fallacy manifests. One is obviously fallacious, and the other is much more context dependent. So the obvious case usually presents like this. So for example, it feels bad to believe heaven doesn't exist. Therefore, heaven must exist. The fact that you feel bad about something doesn't bear on if it's factually true. It would feel bad to know I had cancer, but that wouldn't make a diagnosis from my oncologist false. The website logic.com does a good job of giving examples in this vein. The claims here are concrete and explicit, but the less obvious case has the potential to occur when the claims are more murky or implicit. And this type could actually occur when someone presents an emotionally evocative video, but it would only be the case under certain conditions. If the person showed you a video of a cow getting their head cut off and then said, "You should be vegan," that would probably be fallacious. But in most of the outreach I've seen, this isn't the case. The video is always presented in an extended discussion along with other factual information, like this is standard practice, this is how most pigs are killed, this occurs in the United States, as well as value questions like, do you think animal cruelty is wrong? Do you think animal suffering is undesirable?
Let's check a few examples.
Because unless you're vegan, you're responsible for the worst kind of animal abuse on earth. But is it more difficult for you as a human to make the choice to be vegan, or for the animal? Well, are you eating meat?
Yes.
Then aren't you responsible for this? As long as you eat meat and create demand for this? You either have the choice to be vegan, or to continue living the way you're living right now, but being responsible for what you're seeing on the screens.
And maybe most gratifying of all, fallacyandlogic.com actually uses this example as an acceptable emotional appeal. When someone makes a plea for children's rights to encourage positive behavior, such as a charity poster that shows a picture of hungry children, which sounds awfully close to what we're talking about in the animal rights context.
Well, no. Vegans don't use the footage for some charity cause which people would willingly chime in. They use the footage with the goal of converting people or gaslighting them into feeling like pieces of shit, just like what we saw in those few clips from a minute ago. Not just that he wasted time with 4 redundant points which don't go in his favor, but he failed to even show that vegans aren't emotionally manipulating others. His whole point by the end is that emotions are kinda okay sometimes. The thing is very simple. You don't need footage if you have good arguments, but we all know what vegans think about that.
Guilt is effective. It's the only thing that gets people to go vegan. People say you shouldn't be shaming people, don't guilt trip them. How else are we going to get them to go vegan? How else are you going to get people to take animal abuse seriously if they don't feel guilty for what they're doing? And how are you going to get them to feel guilty if you don't bring up things that make people feel guilty? Like, you are an animal abuser. If you just suggest that they might be an animal abuser, like as a food for thought philosophical discussion that you have at a bar usually, they're not going to take it seriously at all. Right? It's just food for thought. Yeah, that guy made some good points. They walk off. Right? That's it. That's all it ends up resulting in. We don't want that as activists, do we? We want them to really take this issue seriously.